láir de go léir, go club láir ban údar an iarthar, seachtain na cúig, á chuirí láthair ag Leirlin Feiblí na Gaillimhe le tacaíocht ó Creative Ireland. You're all very welcome to week 5 of our book club, Women Writers of the West, presented by Galway Public Libraries with the support of Creative Ireland. In this book club, we're exploring 3 acclaimed novels by 3 of Ireland's most exciting women writers based in the Galway region: Elaine Feeney, Mary Costello, and Nuala O'Connor. And thus far, we've had the wonderful pleasure of discussing Elaine Feeney's debut novel, As You Were, and Mary Costello's Academy Street. And Mary also read for us, of course, last week from her most recent novel of 2019, The River Capture. And we've greatly enjoyed the many rich insights from the authors themselves about their writing practices and their writing tips and their own favourite writers. And so we're moving on now to our third and final author, the wonderful Nuala O'Connor. And this evening we're going to start looking at her gorgeous novel, Becoming Belle. And I suppose partly to catapult us out of these pandemic times, because we're actually a year now into lockdowns and the pandemic, believe it or not. We're finishing with a novel that transports us to the sights and sounds of Victorian London, where we will be completely charmed and bewitched by the gorgeous Belle Bilton. And this novel is skillfully and creatively based on the life of the real-life actress and dancer Isabelle Bilton. And indeed, the Irish Times stated that if Bilton were to read Nuala's portrait of her, quote, "No doubt she would be gratified, for it is all but impossible to read of her coming of age in Victorian London without being utterly charmed by this woman who forged a feminist path ahead of her time," end quote. So that's lovely praise for something that is no easy task, constructing a convincing fictional novel based on a person who existed with limited available material and records. Prior to writing about Isabelle Bilton, Nuala has written fiction centering on everyone from Ernest Hemingway's first wife, Hadley, to Frida Kahlo, and from Elizabeth Bishop to Emily Dickinson. There's her novel, Miss Emily. And of course, her brand new novel, which is garnering plenty of critical praise, Nora, is about Nora Barnacle and will be released in Ireland next month. And I just spoke to Nuala today, and she told me that the New York Times reviewed her book today, and she's got a wonderful review. So that is fantastic news, and we're delighted for Nuala. Our final novel is Becoming Belle, which is based on the true story of a woman destined for stardom and the boundary-crossing love affair that enthralled Victorian London. The story begins in 1887 when we witness Isabelle in her childhood home as the daughter of a military man, and then we see her departing for the big city of London, seeking to make her way independently and build her life on the stage as one half of an immensely popular double act with her sister Flo, known as the Bilton Sisters. I have beautiful photographs because she was a dazzling, luminous woman, and she was actually featured on cigarette cards in Victorian London. And her beauty drew, crowds to the theatre. And Nuala will be telling us about that because Nuala has collected a number of these cards as well. So, and fittingly, it's worth, of course, noting that each of our 3 novels has a Galway connection with Galway County. And in this case, Belle is intimately connected to Garbally Estate, Garbally Park, which went on to, was sold to Garbally College, became the boys' school. But that whole domain there it was under the Viscount Dunloe and the Clancarty Earls, which Belle marries into that family, and Ireland becomes her destiny, and Ballinasloe indeed. So we see, it's nice to see the link there as well in the Galway novels, the Galway connections. So we're coming on to our group discussion for this evening, and as always, I have about 3 questions to stimulate your conversation, and then we'll talk to Nuala later on, as I say. So our 3 questions this evening. So we're going to go into our smaller groups and chat for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll try and float among you just to be a little fly in the wall. And then we'll come back to the main group, and I'll give you 2 minutes notice before we come back, and we'll get a little summary of your points then before we talk to the author. So here are the questions now for this evening. So what are you enjoying most about the story of Belle Bilton is the first one. Second one there is, as a review in the Irish Times noted, Carefully considered historical details support the narrative beautifully without overwhelming it. What features of Victorian life do you find especially appealing in this novel? So there are lots of little implements indeed, and little, even diction words that are interesting that we no longer use, that the author weaves in very artfully into the book. And what appeals to you in that colour that she creates? And thirdly, what do you think the author's purpose was in writing this book? What ideas is she trying to explore, and themes, do you think? Welcome back, everyone. It was fascinating to hear the lively discussions and debates going on about, the characters and the William versus Weston, and the period detail of Victorian London. And you were talking about Nuala's use of language and how challenging that must have been. So just because I think we'll go straight to talking to Nuala now, because I'm delighted to welcome her here. She's just joined us, and Nuala needs very little introduction at this stage, but just to tell you a little bit about her in brief. She lives in County Galway. Her fifth novel, Nora, is about Nora Barnacle, wife and muse to James Joyce, and that is out in it's out in the US since January, and it'll be released here next month, published here in April with New Island Press. Her chapbook of historical fiction, Birdie, was recently published by Ireland House, and Nuala is editor at Flash Ezine Splunk. And you can find much more information about Nuala on her website, nualaoconnor.com. And she also tweets at Nuala Nisi. You're very welcome, Nuala. Wonderful to have you here.
Thanks a million. Thank you.
Well, just I suppose to ease into the book gently. Some people have finished it, some haven't. So we'll ask you kind of a general question. How did you first come to learn about Isabelle Bilton?
Well, I was living in Loughrea and I moved to Ballinasloe in 2005. And when I go to a new place, I love to look into the local history. My father was the local historian in where I'm from in Dublin, in Palmerstown, and my sister wrote actually the history of our area. So it's something I'm just interested in, anything to do with anything old. So heard about this woman who had lived here, Googled her, saw the pictures, and was immediately interested in the idea of a music hall dancer from lively London moving to a market town in East Galway, marrying into the aristocracy when she herself was a commoner. And my interest was just piqued. So I wrote a poem about Belle, which is often how I start. I kind of start on a small canvas.
Okay, interesting.
And then I wrote a flash fiction about her. I'm part of an artist collective here called Group 8. And we picked Garbally Court. Well, we picked Garbally, the house and its land and the family, as a theme for one of our annual exhibitions. So I had a chance to dive deeper into Belle's story, and I wrote a flash fiction actually, which I exhibited with a sort of a photo collage thing I did. And just this happens to me. I just didn't want to leave her alone then. I wanted to know more and more and more about this woman who seemed like a proto-feminist. They wouldn't have used the word feminist in Victorian times, but she seemed like someone who had earned her own living, had trod her own path. And I'm always interested in women who are married to men who are seen as important, I'm inverted commaing, and who are smudged by history and are footnotes to these men's lives. And I found that Belle, when she was referred to at all, was dismissed as a music hall dancer, as if she wasn't a personally important person just for being a person. So I had to dive deeper. And when I found out then she'd had this child out of wedlock, and then she'd gone on to have 5 more children with William, and they seemed very happy. And then all of the shenanigans that took place, I knew I had to write a novel about her. She was too interesting for me not to write about. Her and William's home, Garbally Court, is now Garbally College, St. Joseph's College, and my son goes to school there, and the grounds are still fairly intact, much smaller than they were in the days of the Clancartys. And Belle's grave I can see from my house. It's in the grounds of St. John's Church.
Really?
And I pass her grave on my daily walk, and I always say hello to her. And so I just found I had this communion with her without knowing too much about her, and I needed to know more. And I wanted to tell her story. I'm determined to bring women
Yeah.
alive. You
And you
know,
do it so well, Nuala, because, you know, even what you're saying there, I'm seeing the connection with Nora Barnacle, of course, as well, and the woman overshadowed by the more important male figure. And a really interesting part of the book for me was the fact that, you know, that her independent earnings of £30 a week, that she, when William's allowance was frozen, that actually she was funding him. And you know
yeah,
that she was an independent woman of her time, and that's something, you know, the conditioning in society is so endemic about, you know, the, you know, oh, that dance hall hussy and she married into wealth and all, and we never think about the woman's empowerment and the woman's position, you know, and her importance. And as you say, she's glossed over and dismissed because she was a dancer, etc. And I thought you brought that in a very subtle but powerful way to light there, and you know, so well and so artfully throughout the novel. So then you decide, you start with the poem, then you're doing the research and as part of the artist collective, and then you're just consumed by her and you can see her grave and you decide to embark on the novel. When did you realize, yes, this can be a viable story for a novel?
well, you know, when you start the research, and I get very giddy about research, and I think this is why I'm writing all these historical, these biofictional novels about real people, because the research is just so fascinating. So my research took me to London twice
Mhm.
and to other parts of England. So I went to Aldershot, where Belle was brought up. She was the daughter of a military man. So I went to the barracks where she grew up, and there's a little museum there, kind of a real hokey kind of local museum, but really nice because of that. I love local museums.
Yeah.
And, you know, just getting a feel for what this place looked like. I saw the town hall where she danced, and her mother had danced before her. Um, I went to the National Archives at Kew because their marriage certificate was there, as well as the divorce petition that William filed under duress from his father and his minder. Um, you know, and to see their actual signatures, it's just, and to, you know, they're so alarmingly free with the stuff at Kew. You have to book to see what you need to see,
Yeah.
but then you're just given a box and you take it to a desk and you have their marriage certificate in your hands. And it just feels like reaching back through time to these people that you have grown to love by
Yeah.
writing about them. I tend to do my research in tandem with my writing, you know.
Okay. Okay.
And then I went
Um,
to the National Portrait Gallery as well, to their archives, and I saw pictures of Belle there that I had never seen before. And that was brilliant. Again, they just handed me these photographs and said, there's a photocopier, you know, they're 10p each or whatever.
I
Like,
think we have to
just
share
to,
some of these photographs now. So
yeah,
wait till we see. There's a beautiful one where she's looking into the mirror.
yeah.
Can you see
Look at
that?
her sad little face. She's so beautiful.
Stunning. There's kind of a plaintive look in her expression all the time, isn't there? Something
Always,
sadness, yeah.
always, yeah.
So wait till I see,
Amazing.
and I'll share another one now. Wait till we see. This is a gorgeous one in color.
Yeah, someone
Stunning.
colorized that. Actually, the
Yeah.
person who colorized that did the cover, the American cover as well. They
Oh, okay.
colorized the picture for us. Yeah, so
Okay.
gorgeous.
Okay, we'll
And
just
I
freeze our
found
eyes
I
here
found
for another
lovely one
minute.
at the National Portrait Gallery. There was more sort of family pictures, more sort of relaxed pictures where she wasn't in costume and she
Right.
wasn't acting for the camera. So I had just have one of them to show.
Oh,
Um,
lovely. Yes.
just hold it up to my camera and see if you
Yeah,
can see it.
perfect.
You
Yes.
can see her there with her two of her sons, the twins.
Yeah. Wow,
And
yes.
you see, look at her face, how different it is. She's much more relaxed.
It is different. There's a corner of a smile on each side of her mouth
Yeah.
there. She's a little upturned and her expression is softer,
And her
kind of
hair
more,
is softer and
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah, so it was lovely to see them. It gave me it showed me her motherly side, you know.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned there about biofiction, and I know we had this came up before, especially in our first book club back in October, because we're doing this for 6 months now, the
Mm.
Eilish Dillon book club, where, you know, that sense of the gender genre linkage of kind of that women writing historical fiction can be dismissed, whereas you have a lovely quote on in an article you wrote for writing.ie, and you said, as a woman writer, I'm expected to write either bonnet nostalgia or bodice rippers. Male writers in this equation write about war and ships. And I thought that was really interesting. Could you tease out a bit more for us, maybe, why that term is loaded, or is that term really loaded for women writers, historical fiction? And is that one of the reasons you choose to embrace the term biofiction? Or what is the essential difference, do you think?
Yeah, I think I suppose I was interviewed for a book by an expert on biographical fiction, and the people who wrote the book and did the interviews kind of introduced me to the term biofiction or biographical fiction as what I was doing. I wouldn't really have used that term before then, but then I adapted it because it seemed really right. Um, I remember my first agent telling me not to use the term historical fiction, that certain publishers were allergic to it, just say literary fiction in terms of what I was doing. Labels are a real industry thing, aren't they? They're not
Yeah.
really hugely meaningful. They're just a way to categorize.
Collapsing meaning, really, isn't it, into sound, by into, and it's artificial, as you say. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
a convenience, but it's not a true reflection of the complexity of
because under those umbrellas can be different things. So historical fiction can be like is it Patrick O'Brien about, the
yes, all of those
shipping,
things. Yeah.
and, things about like Caesar and Rome and all this sort of stuff. And then I suppose women's historical fiction is often seen as like literary romance or something, and gets a particular kind of cover. So I was really delighted with Harper this time, HarperCollins. They were very collaborative about the cover, because my agent and myself had a very clear vision of what we wanted. We wanted a very graphic look, and
Yes.
the Belle, actually, I published with Putnam, and again they came up with this beautiful cover. I asked them, would you please use a real picture of the real Belle, and they did, and they did a gorgeous job on it. So
And
it's
I love
really
this one.
helpful
Yeah.
if your publisher will
Yeah.
collaborate with you on that sort of stuff, not just present it to you and say, there's your cover. It's better when you can help in the packaging of your novel. It kind of doesn't happen sometimes, but then sometimes editors and designers are very open to working with you, and that helps, I think, in putting across a story about a book that readers can identify with. So they can look at one book and know this will be romantic and light, and they can look at another one and go, oh, this looks a little bit more now story-like and serious or something.
Yeah, and we do make split-second decisions, don't we? And we're, in a way, we discussed that Eilish Dillon did suffer a little bit from the book covers. She kind of got these, what's the term? It escapes me now, the pot boiler kind of look. She got
and
those, unfortunately. And Hilary Mantel talks about the 70s as well, writing historical fiction. It was a time where women writers were just kind of dismissed a bit in that world. So that's so interesting. On the theme of history, again, your period detail is gorgeous and your prose is beautifully crafted. And in some of the breakout rooms there, people were asking and wanted to ask you about the challenges of sustaining that lovely Victorian, ease, and you've wonderful obscure words like costermonger, poltroonish, hobbledehoy. And it must have been a lot of fun indexing this vocabulary. And, and do you think that, to what extent does it come from your background as a poet, your ear for language?
Oh, definitely think that being a poet is a thing, because you're just obsessed with words and getting things right, and things sounding right. And also, I think I was brought up bilingual, so at home we spoke English. In all of my schooling, I was schooled through Irish, and then I did my BA and my MA in Irish. And I think there's that just obsession with language that I've always had. But like, the Victorian era is so easy to research, because there is book after book. There's a book about every aspect of Victorian living you could possibly care to imagine. One of the best ones I read was called Inventing the Victorians by Matthew Sweet. And then I read a lot of contemporary accounts of Victorian London. So there's a kind of a famous book called Tales from Victorian London by Henry Mayhew. And he's walking around basically meeting the ordinary people, the costermongers, the cress sellers, the milkmaids. And so you get a real feel. Now, he obviously is well-to-do, and the other people are working class.
Walking
he has
around.
a very particular view of these people, but that's okay. He creates atmosphere and abundance. The food and all of that was very interesting too.
Yes.
You know,
And we
I
were
had
talking about the
pictures.
Madeira, sipping the Madeira earlier on. I was very
Yeah,
curious about.
like there's things that they would have eaten like just on a normal basis in a tea shop or whatever, like different kinds of weird sort of hot
You
drinks
mentioned
and things.
jellied eel,
Mm.
actually. And I've often wondered about eel because eel cropped up in, of course, Eilish Dillon a lot in her books about the eel traps and everything. But we don't have an appetite for eel in Ireland. I don't think we've ever really had it. It's more of an English taste, isn't it?
I don't know. We did
Perhaps
in
I'm wrong
Dublin.
about that, but I don't want to digress too much. But jellied eel, it's very much a Mrs. Beaton kind of it
Yeah.
evokes that kind of Victorian, yeah.
So
Really
my
interesting.
father and my brothers used to catch eels in the Liffey and eat them. So
Did they? Oh,
yeah,
that's
they were often
interesting.
frying them on the pan. You know, I think it's something
Oh.
maybe now is less popular, but
Well, you've
um,
answered my question. I've been really curious about that for a long time. So
mm,
thank you. Just, I suppose, a final, and we might ask you to read, and then there's some questions coming in and the chat here from the members. Um, just in terms of creative artistry versus, fact, I think we're all really interested in the blur there between, some people asked about Wertheimer, and at the end, then there's no evidence to say that he was gay, and then we see that I was curious about the canary Pritchard, and then but she actually owned a Saint Bernard dog. We saw at the end. So I'm just wondering. If you could tell us a little bit about this process. I know you mentioned that the details were scant in many ways, and you had to kind of fill in the gaps, and you've just mentioned the Mayhew book and all the rest. And can you spill the beans a bit on some of the places where fact and fiction blur, and some of those decisions that you made in the novel, and how you decided to frame them that way?
yeah, I mean, like writing a novel is all about decisions. Like it's like making a jigsaw with blank pieces. You're trying to draw the picture, but you're also trying to fit everything together correctly. Um, there's a lot of question marks about Wertheimer and his relationship with Belle. Like there was even more things that happened that would make you go, "Oh my God, they were definitely sleeping together." They actually went to Paris together and everything. I just didn't have room for all of the
Yeah,
shenanigans.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but there was also a newspaper article that suggested that he was gay, and that when he died apparently of a fall and a flu, which um, some people felt was a cover up. They actually thought he had killed himself. He
Okay.
married a woman much younger than himself very quickly, and sort of, after Belle had skedaddled with William. Um, so there were a lot of question marks around him.
Around him.
And his
Yeah,
decency towards her was so stand up and so
yeah.
good. The
Remarkably, yeah.
interesting thing is that she did call her child Isidore.
That is
And then
interesting. Yeah.
added to that, when she had a daughter, she called her daughter Beryl Francisca, and Wertheimer's mother's name was Francisca. So there
Mm.
was definitely a deep, deep regard
Deep
there.
attachment there,
Now,
yeah.
whether Belle was a bit of a Becky Sharp, Vanity Fair type social climber and just
Timer.
wanted her title, who knows? But then her marriage with William did work out. It did work out. They seemed to be incredibly happy together. She
Yeah.
was very well loved here in Ballinasloe. She used to hold tea parties on the lawn for children, and she'd send them home with fruit in their hands, which would have been an enormous sort of
Enormous, yeah.
gift to get from
Yeah.
somebody. So
Yeah.
it was just very unfortunate that she contracted cancer so young, and
Very, very
despite
sad.
visiting doctors in Paris and London, she didn't survive. She died at 36. So really sad in the end.
Very sad. And her sister was quite young as well.
Her
I
sister
just
was
randomly picked up an old book by Desmond Hogan the other day, kind of portraits of his travels. And there was a piece about Isabelle Bilton.
yeah,
And
because
she said that
he's
she
from
was
Ballinasloe.
beloved in Ballinasloe, as just as you've said there. Remarkable, remarkable. Um, we've a few questions, and then I might ask you if you want to open up your book and think about
Yeah.
what you'd like to read. That'd be brilliant. Karen is asking, I was wondering why the cover blurb did not refer to the fact that the book was based on real events and people.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a marketing thing.
Good question, Karen.
Yeah, like I was asked, oh, this is going out on YouTube now, so I'm hanging myself, but I was asked not to mention on socials that it was about a real woman. And I really kind of said, oh, why? I thought that would be a great selling point. But for whatever reason, the PR team at the time didn't think it would be. Now, I never failed to mention it, obviously. But Yeah, it's those kind of sales and marketing decisions are out of a writer's control. They're not something that you have a say in. You can do your best, but in the end, the sales team will make their decisions and the marketing team together, and they package the book, not you. You give your tuppence halfpenny, and then they make the end decisions. So that's the reason for that.
I find that fascinating because, I mean, is there an instinct that people will be repelled by if they think it's biography, that it won't be creative or imaginative enough or something. Yeah, it's an interesting, the zeitgeist must be favoring the non, yeah, it's interesting, non-biographies. Great question, Karen. Another question from Jenny. What became of the first son?
Oh, well, I found him at age 11 in a children's home. And then he disappears from records for a while, and then he turns up in the Canadian Army, and he died in America. He did marry and have children of his own. But yes, extremely sad. Weston ended up changing his name at least twice more, and was in and out of jail. A relative of his wrote to me to tell me, oh, he got worse and worse.
Oh my
So
goodness.
this is what was fabulous. After the book came out, a lot of relatives came out of the woodwork. So I was in touch with some of
Fascinating.
William's
Yeah, yeah.
grandson,
Oh,
and
that's
he told
fascinating.
me that he has a lock of Belle's hair, and he has it on his mantelpiece, and her picture, and he talks to it. And I was saying, oh, I talk to her too. I talk to pictures of her I have around my house, and I talk to her grave every time I pass.
Oh,
So
that's
we were
lovely.
communing in our communion with Belle.
That's
But
lovely. Martin and Evelyn have a good question as well. I was curious about Belle's relationship with her mother. What informed your writing of Kate?
yeah, I love to write cranky, narcissistic, jealous mothers. I just find them incredibly enjoyable to write. Verity in The Closet of Savage Mementos is a similar type of woman who's jealous of her daughter. Um, I don't have a jealous mother, and I'm not jealous of my own daughter, but I just find these women, these kind of steely, sort of unpleasant women, just incredibly enjoyable to write. And I
Fascinating.
know Belle can be unpleasant too, but I don't believe in, I don't think it's the writer's business to make paragons of these people of virtue. They need to be there with all their human foibles and frailties, the same as all of us. We're not here to write
Yeah.
people that are hugely palatable. I don't believe in it.
Yes.
Anne Wright is very funny on this. She says that when a man is unlikable in a story, that is the story. When a woman is unlikable, it makes the story a little unpleasant. I'm paraphrasing her, but that's the gist. And I think,
Yeah. We were
there's
talking about the
this
cult of
huge
likability
thing,
in the
isn't
last with Elaine's book as well,
Yeah,
and of course Louise O'Neill has raised that a lot too.
yeah.
And I mean, so many Hollywood movies, you're waiting to see, will the bad guy turn good in the end, and then we all want to give him a medal when he's, it's so inequitable, isn't it?
Isn't
And we're so conditioned to it as well. What do we see? Rosie says the graphics at the start of each chapter captures the essence of the book. So that's a lovely
Yeah,
compliment.
they did a beautiful job. Honestly, that kind of stuff warms your heart because that all comes right at the end when you've done all of the writing, the editing, the prep. You're starting your PR trail, and then they come and they show you the final matter, as they call it, and it just is lovely. Like when my book Miss Emily about Emily Dickinson,
Yes, I
they
have.
had this beautiful little scroll on every chapter, and it was just, I loved the
Yeah,
treatment that the book.
yeah. It's very gratifying to see when the presentation is matching up so cohesively with the subject. So Nuala, would you share a little bit? Would you read a little
Yeah.
bit for us? That'd be lovely.
This is near the start, and she's just danced for Hitchens. This is her first audition, Empire Theatre in London. She's fresh off the train or the coach to London, and she's a bit nervous. So she's just had her audition. Mr. Hitchens had his back to her, and she was guarded as she approached him. But when he swung around, he grinned and held his pipe aloft. £15 a week to start, Miss Bilton, rising to 20 and beyond if you please me, if you continue to please me. He puffed on his pipe. Begin Monday. £15 a week. How father would rejoice. Isabel stepped forward. I thank you, Mr. Hitchens. I thank you ever so much. We will have Alexandra Bassano photograph you. Yes, that much we must do. I will arrange for you to go to his studio at Old Bond Street. Your extraordinarily pretty visage will soon be known, Miss Bilton. Mr. Bassano takes pictures of royalty. Isabelle knew his portraits from The Lady and the Evening Star and many other publications besides. He most certainly photographs the royals, Miss Bilton, and very handsomely he does it too. Mr. Hitchens studied Isabelle. Look here, girl, I mean for you to bypass the chorus. I have a role in mind for you. He pointed the stem of his pipe at her. You are to be my Cupid. Isn't Cupid a boy? Isabelle blurted and felt instantly stupid for saying such a thing. He is a boy, Miss Bilton, he is, ordinarily. The tiny god of large desires, that's Sir Cupid. Mr. Hitchens threw his arms wide. But this, my dear, is a theatre. This is Bohemia, and here we transform beautiful young ladies into Eros. He winked, strode through the Empire's front door and let it slam behind him. £15. Alexander Bassano. Isabelle did a quick jig on the spot, giggled into the air, composed herself, and followed Mr. Hitchens out onto the street.
Lovely, beautifully
That's
read.
with her £15 a week, and I looked that up on one of those, money reckoner things to refresh my memory. That's £1,000 a week in today's money. So
Wow.
she was loaded. So when she offered to help William out financially, she wasn't joking. She had plenty of money.
She had plenty. And it went up to £30 a week, didn't it, as she progressed then?
Later on,
yeah. Wow, just imagine. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nuala. That was a real treat. A lovely way to end our first session with you. And of course, we'll have lots more. We'll continue the conversation next week. And some people are still enjoying the book, and we'll all be finished next week. And we might ask you to read from Nora a little bit next week too.
Absolutely, yeah. Great stuff.
Lovely. Thanks so much.
Great to see you all. Thanks a million.
Good night, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Díomh cóide go léir agus fáilte is fithe go club leabhar banúidir an iarthar seachtaina sé á cuirí láthair ag leabharlann Feiblí na Gaillimhe le tacaíocht ó Creative Ireland. You're very welcome, friends, to week 6 of our Women Writers of the West online book club, presented by Galway Public Libraries with the support of Creative Ireland. Hard to believe we're in our final week now. It's been such an enjoyable journey with you all over the past 5 weeks. And of course, we've been looking at 3 acclaimed novels by 3 of Ireland's most exciting women writers based in the West. We started with Elaine Feeney's debut novel, As You Were. And then we explored Mary Costello's Academy Street. And Mary also treated us to a reading from her most recent novel, The River Capture. And then last week, we began to discuss our 3rd novel and our final book in this book club, the lovely Becoming Belle by Nuala O'Connor. So we opened back in early February with the gripping world of our first character, Sinead Hines, who finds herself seriously ill in hospital and who is keeping a life-changing secret from her family. We followed by immersing ourselves in the world of protagonist Tess Lohan, a solitary, sensitive, introverted young woman raised in the west of Ireland in the 1940s and who takes up nursing and emigrates to the United States. And then we saw her life unfolding through the decades on Academy Street, bringing us right up to the 9/11 period. We then time travelled from the early noughties back to Victorian London, where we entered the exuberant world of Isabelle Bilton, an actress and dancer at the Corinthian Club in the late 1880s. So it's been quite an odyssey with you all, with plenty of rich variety along the way, and many wonderful debates in the chat rooms with you all. And fittingly, each of our 3 novels, of course, had a kind of coincidentally had a County Galway element, which was lovely and a nice feature as well. In the final session, we're delving deeper into Nuala's book, and we're going to broaden the discussion to talk more about her writing process as well. I'll be asking Nuala some questions that I've put to each of our authors in the second week of discussing their books, such as who their own favourite authors are, what inspired them to take up writing, and any writing tips they might have. And a special treat is that Nuala is going to read a little bit from her brand new novel, Nora, tonight as well, which was just published recently across the Atlantic to a very warm critical reception, and which will get its Irish release here next month. Before we move on to our 3 questions for discussion this evening, I want to take this opportunity to thank a number of people. Firstly, my lovely colleagues at Galway Public Libraries, Josephine Vahy, Charlene McAndrew, and Niamh O'Donovan. Josephine and Charlene devised this book club with me, and we planned the books together, and Niamh did all our graphic design. Thank you to Sharon O'Grady, Claire Connolly, and Siobhan O'Malley of the Creative Ireland team, who gave us great support in sustaining the book clubs following on from the wonderful success of the Eilish Dillon Book Club and the popularity. There was quite a demand there to keep it going, and Creative Ireland were wonderful to help us to do that. Thank you to Teresa Lavina and Gavin Lennon of Nova Productions. It's been such a pleasure working with them here, filming these sessions each week. And these sessions will be available soon on Galway Public Library's YouTube channel. Thank you to the staff of Oranmore Library who housed us in these lovely surroundings each week. And last but not least, I want to thank each of you, our members, for making this book club so enjoyable and special by offering your own perspectives and your own opinions each week. And I especially want to salute all of those members from our core group who have travelled the distance along with us, going right back 6 months to the first book club with Eilish Dillon. I know that Cecily Lynch has journeyed with us, Bridget Fox, hi Bridget, Eileen Murphy, Aoife Kelly, Kay McCormack, and I'm just looking around to see the faces. And indeed, from our next book club then, which started in December and ran through January, Journeys in Words, looking at Liam O'Flaherty and Maeve Brennan, we also got some wonderful new members who stayed the course with us and joined us for this book club as well. And I can see there Connie Masterson, Martin and Evelyn Keneally have been with us. So it's like we've got a whole new set of friends, and it's been lovely getting to know you all and hearing your thoughts on the books. So thank you all sincerely for being part of this book club and for your contributions each week. Now, I believe there are a few new people with us as well this evening, just a few. So I'll just make a few last quick housekeeping guidelines to recap. Just to keep your videos on, please, and to keep the mics muted until we go into the discussion groups. So if you could keep the video on, that'd be great, because we're keeping a community feeling going in this cyber delivery. And also to our newcomers, please do introduce yourselves in the breakout rooms, especially if you haven't been with us before. So on to our book again this evening, Becoming Belle. It's based on the true story, of course, of Isabelle Bilton, the talented and charming actress and performer, and her boundary-crossing love affair that enthralled Victorian London. I'm just taking that from the dust jacket there. And it's so interesting that the time period of this book is distilled into 4 action-packed years, if you like, from 1887 to 1891, during which time we see Isabelle departing from her military family in a middle-class small garrison town, military family in a small garrison town, I should say, and then leaving for the big city of London to carve out a new life and career on the stage with her sister, the sisters Bilton, her sister Flo. And then she falls in love with William Viscount Donahue. And of course, she meets the nefarious Weston. So you have our protagonist and our antagonist and everything. And she makes a real impact on the stage in a very short space of time. And within 4 years then, she is, I think it's okay to say in this week, because with no spoilers now at this stage, we've all read the book hopefully, that she returns then as Countess of Clancarty. She returns to Garbally Park, just outside Ballinasloe, as the wife of Viscount Donahue. So ultimately, Ireland is her home, and we'll be talking to Nuala a little bit more. We touched on that last week, but we'll talk about that in more depth shortly, perhaps about her memory, in the popular memory, how she was remembered in local history, etc. So we're going to come on now to our group discussion. about the novel. I have 3 questions each week to stimulate your conversation. You don't have to stick to them rigidly, but it's just to provoke some thought and discussion. And then we'll have the privilege of speaking to Nuala after the breakout sessions. So while you're in the rooms, maybe think about any questions you'd like to put to her, and you could type them into the chat. That'd be really helpful too. There's a chat facility there, a little at the bottom of your screen, and you can type any questions in there for Nuala. So I'd ask you now to, so we'd be in the groups for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll try and get around to each group hopefully within that time. So when you see a notification to join the room, please join. And I'm going to share the questions now. So what did you most enjoy and what did you least enjoy about the book? If you could hear the same story from another character's perspective, who would you choose and why? And then if you were making a movie, who would you cast? Welcome back. I think everyone is nearly back with us now. We just have a few minutes before we're going to talk to Nuala. So I'll just check that everyone is back with us. Still a few people joining us there. Hi. Hi, everyone. We'll be going to talk to Nuala now shortly, but I just want to do a little feedback maybe from each group a little bit. Room 1 there, you were having a good discussion, a good general discussion about the book clubs and recapping. Did you decide on what you liked most and least about the novel? Would anyone like to feedback? Kieran, will we put you on the spot there?
Well, yeah, that'll serve you right now, Kieran. You can be the rapporteur.
Yeah, well, Bridget very interestingly worked in the West End in the 1970s. So what she liked about it is how she could relate to a lot of the goings on, shall we say. So that was interesting. Yeah.
I think I recall you mentioned that in the past. All right, Bridget. Yeah. So you thought it was very convincing and well portrayed, and the vibrant life of that world was well evoked.
And all of the places, you know, some of them, quite a lot of them are still there, you know, and that I was saying that nighttime life, you know, in that world, and that there's all of this, and what I didn't say in the group, you know, because that kind of hovers around Wertheimer, you know, there's this whole gay world, you know, that you know, even in this, well, it was always there really, but it's kind of has that kind of if you're in the centre of London in the West End, it has a kind of dramatic flair about it when it's tied up with the theatre, you know. So I thought that was very well.
That was well evoked. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
And thanks very much there, Bridget and Kieran in room 1. Room 2 then, you were commenting on, you were asking again about her father, whatever happened to the connection with her dad who had supported her financially and everything, and we didn't hear further from him in the book. That was a very interesting question. And there were a few comments about Belle herself being perhaps a little self-obsessed and things like that. So that was very interesting. Would anyone like to feedback there from room 2?
I think, this is Trina here, I think that was our group. Because when we started talking about what we liked, we started talking about Belle, and we, you know, liked her to somewhat greater or lesser degree. And myself, I think I might have said she was quite self-obsessed. She was very clear about what she wanted, and she went for it.
Yes.
And
single-minded.
Very single-minded. I think somebody mentioned, I'm sorry, is it Kay in our group, that she was
Kay, Patricia and Trina were in room 2. Yes.
Kay reminded her a bit of Becky Sharp, you know, from Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair, yes.
That was interesting. Yeah. But we did mention actually that thing that her father gave her the money to go off to London to follow her dream, and we never heard a word of him again. She seemed to manage to forget him quite easily.
Yes, that's interesting. I see Nuala is with us now, and we're going to put some of these questions to Nuala because I want to maximise the time with you, Nuala. We've got until 8. Room 3, you made a good comment that William was a bit of a flake. I thought that was a great word, bit of a flake. And so actually, there was another question there that I'm going to put to Nuala now. We'll jump straight in. Nuala, did William really stand up to his father in the courtroom?
No,
Actually,
he didn't.
Did he not? Okay.
So I wrote the courtroom scenes based very much on the courtroom transcripts and newspaper reporting of the time. Now, obviously, newspaper reports can be extremely biased and one-sided, and women tend to be downgraded, especially women who were seen to be trying to break into the aristocracy, etc., etc.
Yes, of course.
So when my agent read the manuscript, she said to me, you know, because William is problematic, he is a bit of a wet fish, and one wonders sometimes what she saw in him, you know. And my agent very much felt, I always do my first edit with my agent, Grania, and she said, I feel like William needs to stand up to his father, that he's just being too sort of laid back. Yes. The father sat there lying about both of them, you know, and so, you know, you have these discussions with agents and editors. Everything they say to you is a suggestion, but sometimes the suggestions are quite strong and you have to sort of weigh up. And, you know, there is a thing about how real life is grand and court cases are grand, but there has to be, the novel has to work on a fictive level. So there has to be a certain amount of drama. Apparently Henry James used to write in the margins of his own manuscript when he was self-editing them, dramatize. And so I always try and keep that in mind as well. So yes, Grania suggested that William have a go at the Earl. The Earl was behaving very badly in the courtroom. It wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility that William would have shouted at him, you know.
Yeah. Nuala, you actually you consulted these transcripts from court and everything, and so a lot of it is actually very, you know, based on what actually took place.
Yeah, and in a sense that made it the trickiest scene to write. And while I was writing the novel, I really kind of was dreading having to tackle that, because I had read through the court manuscripts, the scripts rather, and the newspaper reporting, and I mean, talk about conflicting information. So I had to build the court case as a dramatic piece of work, but also try and remain true to what happened, and for Belle to sit there and have her feelings about it, because after all, I'm writing biofiction. It's about one woman's internal, you know, her journey or whatever. So I had to do all of that, and it was quite tricky. And, you know, obviously court cases are very long and very boring, and so I had to pull out a lot of stuff and just get to the meat of it, you know.
Get to the meat and the dramatic tension. And you did it so well. It's beautifully controlled. And I forgot to welcome you officially.
That's okay. We don't have much time.
And I gave an introduction to you last week. You don't need much of an introduction at this stage. We all know of your work and who you are, and about your new book, Nora, which you're going to treat us to a little reading from later on. We're looking forward to that. I just want to come back to like the stunning, radiant beauty of, you know, of Isabelle Bilton, and you know, you had a beautiful piece in the Literary Hub about reconstructing her and the photographic collection you built up, and you kindly sent on some of the photographs. You talked about the practice of, is it cartophily, collecting the cards of?
Yeah, I've looked up this word to try and figure out how to pronounce it, and nobody seems to agree. So I, in my head, call it cartophily, which sounds stupid, but cartophily sounds a bit more realistic. So it's basically, and I think a lot of us will remember these cards from our childhood, from being even in the sweet cigarette packets and things. So they were supposed to be educational in a sense. So there'd be sets. So there'd be, you know, sets of animals, sets of ships, sets of great houses. Garbally Court actually was included. I have the cigarette card for that. And royalty and things like that. But they also did a line in contemporary actresses and known beauties, so beautiful ladies. But like some of the pictures of Belle and Flo, her sister, were quite risque, and presumably these cards were put into these packets with their knowledge that they had given the photographers Downey or Bassano or whoever it was permission to use the images in this way. You know, I don't know who benefited, apart from the fact they were good PR for someone who made their living on the stage.
Yes.
The cards were sold with cigarettes to attract men, obviously, to different brands. They were aimed at men's cigarettes. It was déclassé for a woman to smoke. Now, theatre women did smoke, but you wouldn't see a lady of a great house smoking necessarily, or you wouldn't have seen her certainly not do it in public, you know.
And certainly not having collectible cards with the male image.
Not at all.
Truly a female objectification.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there was groups objected to them. There was a Canadian group who accused cigarette companies of trying to get young boys hooked on cigarettes purely to look at the female form and all this sort of thing. So there was like double sort of jeopardy there. But
oh, that's fascinating. There's an image that you sent me, and it was only when I read the book I realized that this is probably the image that that you were working from. This gorgeous image here, yes, with the crown, and it's on page 270 in my edition. I have this edition where in a chapter entitled "A Report," where Alexander Bassano is taking her is photographing her, and he hands her the tiara with the 7 tall crests that shoot up from the circlet like icicles. So I'm wondering, is this that's the picture that inspired that particular chapter? Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, the costumes were incredible, you know, they were just top notch. And then when she became Lady Dunlow, you know, then she suddenly has new cachet in the theatre. She gets billed as Lady Dunlow, even though her husband is off in Australia and wherever else he is. You know, she's now Lady Dunlow, and they reissue a lot of the cabinet cards and carte de visite. So she'd be sold as a postcard as well as in these cigarette cards. With Lady Dunlow emblazoned across the bottom, and then later Countess Clancarty. So yeah, big business in these photographs and the costumes. She did try and destroy one of the plates for an early photograph of herself that was taken by Downey's, and she's in this kind of corset, and like really when you think this is the late 1880s, this is risque stuff. And she did actually try and destroy the plate, but she was unsuccessful. The image is out in the world, and was when she was alive. Yeah.
And you chose to end the novel then with her arrival at Garbally Park. A lovely way to end, you know, but it does leave us wanting more, of course. And Helen Cullen, in her review in the Irish Times, is requesting a sequel. Is there any plan to? Well, firstly, we'll come back to maybe arriving at Garbally. Could I just ask you, we don't hear much, I suppose. I've only seen a few scant references to her there in Ballinasloe, but is there much in the local history about Isabelle Bilton and William and the fact that her past on the stage and everything? Is there much in the local memory?
Yeah, she's mentioned in passing, and this was why I became fascinated. I felt she was very much a footnote to his life and you know, the ruination and the fall of the ascendancy and blah 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 blah. Very well remembered by all accounts. She thrived in Ballinasloe. She was really well liked by local people. We have to remember she was an ordinary person who married into an aristocratic family. So she very much was comfortable with ordinary people. She used to throw picnics on the lawn at Garbally for local children. And once she invited more than 60 school children to her home for a party and gave them all 2 pieces of fruit each when they were leaving. That's the kind of kindness in post-famine Ireland that doesn't go unnoticed by people. So she was very, very well liked, and people were devastated when she died young. And you were asking about the sequel. Yeah. Originally, when I started writing about Belle, I thought I was going to write about her illness and her treatment in Paris for her cancer and stuff like that. Right. Probably because I had lost a sister at the same age to cancer at 36. And maybe that's what was on my mind. I don't know. It's very hard to know sometimes where stuff comes from. But in the end, the 4 years leading up to her sort of, you know, marriage to William seemed like the most interesting thing. And then we end with her in Ballinasloe, in Garbally Court, and she realizes what she's been looking for all along is a home, a settle spot. And when I look at my novels as a piece, it seems to me every woman in these stories, because they are all about women, is looking for a home. And you know, you never know what you're at as a writer. But I don't know, in the Galway 2020 issue of The Stinging Fly, I have an essay about me searching for home, and it's just like I just kind of realized, oh, okay, that's what everything is about for me, you know.
Oh, fascinating.
Always this kind
Fascinating.
of feeling of wanting to belong, and I think that's
Yeah.
just obviously
Universal.
something I'm obsessed with.
We're all, I suppose it's part of our humanity, yeah.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I'm going to ask you a few questions that I'm putting to each of our 3 authors in the book club. But before I come on to just getting back to, you know, the way you control the text beautifully and staying inside the characters' heads and their point of view specifically. In terms of the process of writing this, I know that Bernie and a few people were asking last week, and it'd be great if you could elaborate on it. Did you kind of collate, did you write it first in ordinary, everyday, contemporary language, and then kind of, I can't imagine doing that, but did you kind of say, I wanted to say this, and then I'm going to go back and translate it into Victorian parlance, or
No,
did you?
I get into the sort of sound of the novel and I'm grand. Once you have the thing, it's like a voice in your ear and you can just carry forward.
Going with it,
The
yeah.
interesting thing for me about this novel was I made a decision, a very conscious decision, to write it in the third person, because originally I had chapters from William's point of view. My editor asked me to remove them. So I had to find a way to keep William in there. And so I used the letters he sent and stuff like that. That was really difficult, big restructuring thing that went on. I
And were
don't
those
find
letters actual? Did you were those letters actual documents that you read?
no. I mean,
Oh.
I've seen one or two. I actually own a letter that William wrote back from that trip. I bought it on a well-known auction site. So I do have, you know, I have some Clancarty memorabilia.
Yeah.
But what was I saying about the letters?
Oh, sorry. No, I'm interjected there. I'm just looking at the time here, and I'm wondering. I know you're going to read a little bit from Nora. I just want to ask you those questions I've been putting to the other authors. Your own favorite writers.
Oh yeah. So I would say, like, straight off, 3 that hop into my head would be Anne Enright for her humor, her insight, her humanity, the sorrow in her work. I'm kind of a melancholic person, so I love all that. And I just think she's a genius. Every time I listen to an interview with her, it's just like she's just so insightful.
Height of her Paris, she's amazing.
Emma Donahue is another big favorite.
Yes,
We do a similar thing, reactivating lost women, shall we say. And she writes bad women really well. And I love an old flawed character, you know, I'm not averse to them at all. And then Flannery O'Connor, the American writer who is of Irish descent. Her short stories are so great. They're wicked. They're this great marriage of the vicious and the banal.
Yeah.
Her dialogue is just top notch. Yeah. So love those 3.
She's underrated, really. Yeah, absolutely. And just, I suppose, what books, I suppose you've partly answered there, influenced your own writing and the decision to become a writer? What made you, what propelled you to make that leap?
You know, the usual thing with writers, it grew out of my love of reading, and I did grow up in a bookish household. I wasn't sporty, I danced was my thing, and I read, basically. I had a kind of an outdoorsy life, but I because we lived in a sort of a rural part of Dublin, but I loved reading. And then books that influenced me, honestly, everything from Walter Mackin to Jane Austen. I would read anything. We used to go to Sailor Works and we'd go straight to the bookstall and buy everything, you know. 2 books that I'm very drawn to: lyrical language. I have an ambition to write a novella. I keep trying and I keep failing because I keep writing these long books now. I used to write short books. But 2 novellas that astonished me that I just love and I love to recommend to people. One is called Silk, and it's by Alessandro Barrico, Italian writer, translated into English. There's several different translations. About a French silk merchant who travels to Japan and falls in love with a woman. I say falls in love because they never actually speak, and I don't believe you can fall in love with someone without speaking to them, but whatever, it's beautifully done. And the second one I'd like to recommend is a novella called Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton. It's about a writer / duchess called Margaret Cavendish, who was in the 17th century. And I just found the book astonishing. It's so strange. It's partly first person, and then there's a third person narrative. The language is beautiful. It's just, if you like unusual quirky narratives. You'll really enjoy it, and it's short. You'll be through it in no time. So they're two that
They're
I really
great tips, and I'm fascinated. The novella is kind of one of my favorite things as well. And I, like yourself, I'd love to write a novella one day, but you've surpassed those ambitions now, Nuala. You know, you've done all of that.
No.
But,
We have to have ambition.
So for people who want to write a novel and just tackle it during lockdown, what tips would you? I suppose you've just said there, keep reading widely and read what you love, I suppose. And would you have any other kind of tips for someone who's, you know, wanted to set out?
Especially if you're normally a poet or a short story writer, don't be daunted by the length of the novel. The length of it does not matter, okay? You can write a novel that's 45,000 words long. And if you write that in increments of 200 words at every session that you can sit down, and try and make a routine for yourself, write a few times a week at least, because the more you're with a piece of work, the more it flows and the more you understand it. I tend to live, eat, breathe my work when I'm working on it, especially a long fiction. So the more you can keep in touch with it, the better. It's like anything. It's like any practice. If you make something a habit, it becomes habitual and then it becomes easier in a sense. But like I aim for 500 words a day when I'm writing a novel. Anne Enright aims for 200 words a day, much more manageable. And if you can do that, the words do build up and, you know, the thing builds up. And don't think of it as tiny little stories, your chapters, you know, don't necessarily daunt yourself by saying, oh, it's too long.
Bite-sized chunks. That you can just put together, and that's a really good tip.
Patchwork it as well. You don't have to write a linear start to finish novel. If you have a scene in your head, write that scene. Other scenes will grow around that, you know.
Oh, that's excellent. Very encouraging. That's great. Great tip there. So just to come on finally now to, last but not least, your wonderful new work, which is garnering lots of critical acclaim stateside and which will be released here in April. And we're all dying to see it. I haven't read it yet. I'm dying to see it, to read it. You said some lovely things about, I'm really interested in the blur between biography, hagiography, story and myth, particularly when it comes to women. I like to humanize my subjects without necessarily idolizing them. I want to honor them as rounded people, complete with flaws and eccentricities. My aim is to give voice to women who have been silenced, ignored, or misinterpreted. And the best way I know to do that is to put them center stage in a story or novel. And you've certainly achieved this with Isabelle Bilton. And I haven't read Nora yet, I'm really looking forward to, but it sounds like you've done an equally accomplished job for Nora Barnacle. Can you tell us something about the challenges involved in focusing the spotlight onto the woman, onto the female character? For example, here, I suppose, on Nora as opposed to Joyce.
Yeah, I suppose there's so much known about Joyce. Brenda Maddox's biography of Nora obviously was a brilliant help to me. It's called Nora, The Real Story of Molly Bloom. Brilliant help to me. And then Pádraig O'Lee has a short book about Nora. Vivian Igo has a book about the places that they live. So there's loads out there. It's just a matter of piecing together the chronology it was for me for this. And again, like Belle, like Nora, like Emily, I just, you know, completely fall in love with these women and I want to honor them. So these novels for me are acts of love. I'm bringing these women forward. We're all unlovable as much as we're lovable. And I want to show that
the rounded picture, the full.
Exactly, yeah. Even, you know, just because we have faults doesn't mean we're not worthy. And I think Nora was magnificent. He'd have done nothing without Joyce, would have done none of it without Nora by his side. She was his rock and she was his muse. I'm just going to read a tiny bit.
True. I can't get simple-minded Jim out of my head. The fact that he called him
simple-minded Jim, which is hilarious. He was a man-child, you know.
So you're going to read a section from the book.
This is just a tiny bit about so they're in Pola, which was the first place that Jim actually worked in a Berlitz school, and it's now Croatia. Back then it was part of Austria-Hungary. So they're in, it's called Pula these days, it was Pola. So it's November, they've been away a month and she's already pregnant. And she has to tell her she's pregnant. She's like many women, she was uneducated about this stuff. My stomach swills like water down a drain and my head on the pillow is leaden. I grunt and sigh and tell Jim to get up without me. I know he's itching to get to his writing anyway before he goes to the school to teach. Across the pages his hand goes every morning, scratch, scratch, scratch with his nib, and his face takes on a concentrated, faraway look. Now, instead of getting his papers to start, he props onto one elbow and peers into my face. Nora, are you all right? Oh, that pasta I ate last night, little as it was, it's threatening to heave out of my gullet onto the bed. I let out a groan that would rouse a graveyard. We had gone to the Café Miramar to eat because our potatoes ran out, and I was too tired to walk from Via Giulia to the market, buy them, walk back, peel and boil them. In the cafe, I ate a tiny bowl of pasta al pesto, and then belched and gurgled all the way home after it. My innards were bad, and I felt altogether out of sorts. Now the smell of that pesto comes back to me, and the sharp green taste of it, and I retch. Nothing comes up. Oh, I'm in a savage mess this morning, Jim. I think you're in a peculiar way, Nora, that's what it is. Ah, what do you mean? Spit pools in my mouth and my whole throat fills with a sourness that's starting to feel familiar. I've had it the last few days. It must be the food, all that garlic, or I took something here at home that was on the turn, the milk maybe. 3 days in a row, Nora? I think not, my love. Don't we buy fresh milk every day? Jim lies back beside me. His arm brushes against my breast and I shove him away. Oh, don't tip off me. My nipples are stiff as pegs. For once, I can't bear Jim to touch me. The thought of his mouth on my breast makes me angry somehow. The stuff of my nightgown is irritation enough. When it scratches against me, I want to scream. Jim leans close again, his breath mucky from old wine and tobacco, and I lurch away. This time, what little is in my stomach hurls up through me, out of my mouth and onto the floor. Oh, I cry, sweat oozing between my eyebrows, down my back, under my breasts. Oh, I'm murdered, Jim. I'm in bits altogether. Still, I make to rise from the bed to clean the sick, but he gets up first and wipes the floorboards with a rag. I lie back and will myself to sleep, for it's only in oblivion that I don't feel unwell. Nora, I tell you, you're in a peculiar way. Why are you riddling me, Jim? Tell me, what's wrong with me? For the love of Lucifer, girl, you're pregnant. My eyes snap open. I clutch my belly and moan. Oh, Jesus, oh God, oh Mother Mary, I don't want him to be right, but as sure as shit stinks, he is right. That's Nora. God love her.
Wonderful. Yeah, really, wow, yeah, refreshingly visceral.
There's more than that in it now.
I know, I did see Earthy in one of the reviews, all right, so it's definitely living up to that accolade.
Yeah, I have some of the erotic letters in there as well, and so
is it difficult to write sex scenes actually? Because I meant to ask you, like Becoming Belle, it's quite raunchy and heated in places. Is it quite a challenge? How do you like that? How do you go about that challenge? What are the?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's necessary. Like, I think the way we sort of make sex a big secret in this country is just ludicrous. Like, we pretend it doesn't exist, and yet it's such an enormous part of most of us, of our lives. And so I don't believe in closing the bedroom door on my characters. And these Nora and Jim were so sensual. It was such a central part, especially of their early relationship. There was no way it wasn't going in, I find it quite fun, actually. To write. Yeah, I know this is going out on YouTube, so I'll say no more. But no,
it's all about enjoying it. So yeah, you enjoy it, and it's
no, and I think it's important.
It's not a hard task to do. So it's that's good.
Exactly. I mean, I could say that back then people didn't put sex in books, but of course. Joyce did.
yeah, of course, yes, indeed, yes. Might say. Thank you so much, Nuala. What a note to end on. It's been such a privilege to have you with us, and thank you for that wonderful reading. We're all looking forward to Nora, and wish you the very best of luck with it.
Thanks so much.
And thanks everyone for being on this journey with us. I'm going to miss many of my friends that I made over the last 6 weeks, and indeed 6 months, who've been with us right through. Looking at a few there, Bridget and Cecily and Eileen, and you've sent lovely emails in to us as well. Thank you so much. Lovely compliments coming in. So take care and keep reading and stay safe. Agus ihawa slán go fóill.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Emily. Thank you, Nuala.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.